There are structures built to house families, and there are monuments built to house obsessions. Today, we aren't looking at cozy suburban homes or clinical skyscrapers. We are diving into a world of architectural fever dreams, places where logic was traded for madness, and where stone, steel, and wood were bent to the will of broken hearts and eccentric minds. You will witness a palace built from pebbles collected on a mail route, a fortress guarded by a fire-breathing dragon in the middle of a forest, and a jagged skyscraper that has stood empty for decades like a hollow tomb. This is a journey through the most irrational blueprints ever conceived. No filters, no safety nets, just pure, unadulterated human persistence. Let's get into it. The story begins in the humid wilderness of Florida, in a place called Homestead. At first glance, it looks like a collection of prehistoric ruins, or perhaps a temple left behind by a civilization that disappeared thousands of years ago. But this is the Coral Castle, and the truth behind its creation is far more unsettling than any ancient myth. Everything you see here, massive walls, a 20-ton revolving gate, and furniture carved from solid rock, was moved, shaped, and placed by one single man who weighed barely 100 pounds. His name was Edward Leedskalman, a Latvian immigrant who arrived in America with a hole in his chest where his heart used to be. The legend says that Edward was supposed to marry his 16-year-old sweetheart back in his homeland, but she called off the wedding just one day before the ceremony. Devastated and drifting toward the edge of sanity, Edward spent the next 28 years of his life building a castle for a woman who would never step foot inside it. This isn't just a construction site. It is a sprawling, limestone letter of unrequited love. But here is where the reality starts to bend. Edward worked entirely alone, and he worked only under the cover of darkness. He had no heavy machinery, no steam engines, and no team of laborers. When neighbors asked how a frail, sickly man could lift blocks of coral that weighed more than an adult elephant, Edward would simply look at them with sunken eyes and claim that he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids. He claimed he knew how to manipulate magnetism and gravity itself. Imagine a 9-ton gate so perfectly balanced that a child could push it open with a single finger. Engineers from all over the world have traveled to this site, bringing their sensors and their math, and many of them have left scratching their heads in genuine confusion. The precision is terrifying. Edward didn't use mortar or cement. The stones are held together by nothing but their own staggering weight and the perfect fit of their edges. Inside this coral labyrinth, you find a throne room, a sundial that tracks time with celestial accuracy, and even a telescope aimed at the North Star, all carved from a seabed that died millions of years ago. The atmosphere here is heavy with the scent of salt and the echoing silence of a man who spoke to no one. Edward lived in a tiny, cramped room at the top of a square tower, surrounded by his tools and his solitude. He died taking his secrets to the grave, leaving behind a masterpiece that feels less like a building and more like a physical manifestation of a nervous breakdown. It is a place where the laws of physics seem to take a back seat to the sheer, stubborn power of a broken spirit. People often report feeling a strange vibration in the air as they walk between these massive monoliths, as if the magnetism Edward claimed to harness is still humming beneath the surface. It is the ultimate monument to the what if, a limestone riddle that proves that if you are lonely enough and obsessed enough, you can move mountains without ever asking for help. This isn't just architecture. It is a ghost story told in stone. Leaving the silent, magnetic monoliths of Florida behind, we head across the Atlantic to the rural heart of France, specifically to a quiet town called Autrive. Here, the landscape is defined by rolling hills and modest farmhouses. But hidden among them is a structure so hallucinogenic and intricate that it looks like it was coughed up by a dream. This is the Ideal Palace, or the Palais Idéal, and it represents one of the most staggering examples of what happens when a simple man decides that his reality is far too small for his imagination. While most people spend their lives following a preordained path, Ferdinand Cheval decided to spend 33 years of his life bending down to pick up stones. Cheval was not an architect. He was not a mason. He was a humble postman who walked a 20-mile route every single day through the French countryside. In April of 1879, during one of his routine walks, he tripped over a stone of such bizarre and beautiful shape that he tucked it into his pocket. That stumble was the catalyst for a 30-year descent into architectural madness. For the next 3 decades, as he delivered letters to the local villagers, he pushed a wooden wheelbarrow along his route, filling it with uniquely weathered pebbles and fossilized limestone shaped by the ancient movements of the earth. To his neighbors, he was a laughingstock, the local eccentric who spent his evenings in the dark, working by the light of an oil lamp, stacking rocks in his vegetable garden, while the rest of the world slept. But what emerged from that garden is nothing short of a surrealist cathedral. The palace is an explosion of styles that should not exist together. It is a melting pot of Hindu mythology, Christian grottos, and Islamic minarets, all encrusted with stone animals, giants, and fairies. There are no straight lines here. The walls seem to flow like liquid wax or the gnarled roots of a prehistoric forest. Every square inch is covered in sprawling poetry carved into the rock and intricate sculptures of octopuses, elephants, and palm trees. It is a Lego set designed by someone who had never seen the instructions and didn't believe in the laws of gravity. Cheval didn't have a blueprint. He simply allowed the stones to tell him where they wanted to go, creating a hand-built labyrinth that stands over 10 meters high and 26 meters long. The sheer physical toll of this project is impossible to grasp. We are talking about 10,000 days of back-breaking labor. Cheval was 67 years old when he finally finished his masterpiece, having moved over 100,000 stones by hand. The interior is just as haunting as the facade, featuring a maze of narrow galleries and damp tunnels that feel like walking through the digestive system of a giant stone beast. It is a tactile, gritty experience. You can feel the rough edges of the fossils and the sharp grit of the sand he mixed with lime to create his own primitive concrete. The tragedy of the ideal palace is that when Cheval finished, the local authorities refused to allow him to be buried inside his creation, as was his final wish. Undeterred, the 78-year-old postman spent another 8 years building a massive, equally ornate tomb in the local cemetery, proving that his obsession would not end even at the edge of the grave. Today, this palace is a pilgrimage site for artists and dreamers, a testament to the fact that greatness doesn't require a diploma or a bank loan. It only requires a wheelbarrow and a level of stubbornness that borders on the divine. It is a palace built by a man who refused to be just a postman, leaving behind a stone scream that echoes through the centuries, reminding us that even the most ordinary life can produce something absolutely terrifyingly beautiful. If the French countryside felt like a fairy tale gone wrong, our next stop takes us into the jagged peaks of the Colorado wilderness, where one man's battle against the government turned into a vertical fortress of iron and ego. Deep in the heart of the San Isabel National Forest in Colorado, the trees part to reveal a silhouette that looks like it was ripped straight out of a dark fantasy novel. This is Bishop Castle, a soaring cathedral of stone and iron that defies every building code, every safety regulation, and every ounce of common sense. It is a massive, jagged middle finger made of granite, aimed directly at the authorities who tried to stop it. While most people are satisfied with a deck or a garden shed, Jim Bishop spent over 60 years of his life building a fortress that stands 16 stories tall, and he did it entirely with his own 2 calloused hands. The madness began in 1969. Jim was a 24-year-old ironworker who bought a small plot of land for $450, intending to build a simple family cabin. But as he started stacking the local rocks, the project took on a life of its own. Every time a neighbor made a comment or a government official showed up with a clipboard and a list of violations, Jim didn't stop. He just built higher. He became a man possessed by the verticality of his own ambition. There are no blueprints here, no engineers, and certainly no cranes. Jim moved every single stone himself, some weighing hundreds of pounds, using a primitive pulley system and sheer, raw strength. When you stand at the base of this monument to defiance, the scale is dizzying. The walls are made of local stone held together by over 10,000 bags of mortar, but it is the ironwork that truly makes your skin crawl. Jim, being a master welder, created intricate, terrifying walkways that wrap around the exterior of the towers like metal webs. These bridges are not for the faint of heart. They are made of open steel mesh that allows you to look straight down hundreds of feet to the forest floor below. As the wind whistles through the canyons, the entire iron structure sways and groans, vibrating with the energy of a man who refused to be told no. But the true centerpiece of this architectural insanity sits at the very top. Perched on one of the highest spires is a massive, shimmering dragon made from recycled metal trays. This isn't just a statue, it is a functional beast. Jim rigged a burner from a hot air balloon inside the dragon's throat, allowing it to spit actual fire into the Colorado sky. It is a theatrical display of power and madness that can be seen for miles. Inside the castle, the atmosphere is just as chaotic. There are grand ballrooms with stained glass windows that Jim crafted himself, and spiral staircases that lead to nowhere, twisting upward into the clouds like the stairways of a fever dream. The history of Bishop Castle is a history of war, not against an invading army, but against the United States Forest Service and local building inspectors. For decades, Jim fought legal battles to keep his creation standing, arguing that his land was his kingdom and he was its sovereign king. He lived on site, often screaming at visitors about his political views, his voice echoing through the stone halls as loudly as his hammer. It is a place of intense, vibrating energy, where the line between genius and psychological collapse is non-existent. Sadly, the story of the castle is also tinged with deep personal sorrow. Jim lost his son in a tragic accident on the property, and rather than abandoning the project, he turned the castle into a memorial, pouring his grief into the very mortar that holds the stones together. It is a skeletal, haunting structure that feels alive, as if the stones themselves are exhaling the exhaustion of their creator. Bishop Castle is a reminder that a man with a welder and a grudge can build something that outlasts any empire. It is a testament to the rugged, terrifying individualism of the American West, a place where one man decided that if he couldn't find a heaven, he would build a stone ladder and climb there himself. We are leaving the fire-breathing dragons of the forest behind and heading to the sun-drenched hills of Sicily, to a villa where the architecture wasn't built for beauty, but for the sole purpose of horrifying anyone who dared to look at it. In the scorching landscape of Sicily, within the town of Bagheria, stands a gate that leads not to a Mediterranean paradise, but to a curated nightmare. This is the Villa Palagonia, a place so bizarre that for over 2 centuries it has been whispered about as the Villa of Monsters. While the aristocrats of the 18th century were obsessed with symmetry, elegance, and the refined beauty of the Enlightenment, Prince Francesco Ferdinando Gravina had a much darker, more chaotic vision. He didn't want a home that invited admiration. He wanted a home that reflected the fractured mirror of a twisted mind. The prince was a man of immense wealth, and according to his contemporaries, an equally immense level of psychological instability. He spent a fortune transforming his ancestral estate into a grotesque theater of the absurd. As you approach the limestone walls, you are not greeted by statues of noble gods or graceful nymphs. Instead, you are stared down by a literal army of stone freaks. More than 60 statues, originally numbering over 200, line the walls and parapets, featuring a parade of decapitated giants, deformed dwarves, men with the heads of donkeys, and musicians with 5 arms. It is a visual assault, a deliberate attempt to provoke a sense of nausea and dread in the viewer. Walking through the gates of Palagonia feels like stepping into a static carnival of the damned. The prince's obsession was so total that he didn't stop at the exterior. The interior of the villa was designed as a trap for the senses. Legend has it that the prince lined the ceilings of the grand halls with mirrors tilted at odd, jarring angles so that anyone walking through would see their own body distorted and chopped into pieces. The furniture was famously deceptive. Chairs were built with hidden spikes or lopsided legs, and some were even upholstered with sharp rocks hidden under thin layers of silk to prick the unsuspecting guest. It was a residence designed for discomfort, a physical manifestation of the prince's own deep-seated misanthropy and his desire to mock the very society he belonged to. The atmosphere within these walls is one of suffocating eccentricity. Travelers like Goethe, who visited in 1787, described the villa as a feverish place, noting that the prince's madness seemed to seep into the very masonry. Why would a man of such status commit his life to the creation of ugliness? Some say it was a desperate attempt to ward off the evil eye through the use of shocking imagery. Others believe it was a silent, architectural scream of revenge against a world that he felt had rejected him. Every statue, carved from the local tufa stone, has been weathered by the salt air into a porous, melting shape, making the monsters look as though they are slowly decomposing in the Sicilian sun. The Villa Palagonia is a haunting reminder that architecture can be used as a weapon. It is a house built to insult, to frighten, and to disorient. Even today, as the suburban sprawl of Bagheria closes in around it, the villa remains an island of pure, concentrated strangeness. It stands as a monument to the fact that when a human mind loses its grip on reality, it doesn't just create ghosts. It builds them out of stone and forces everyone else to live among them. It is the ultimate anti-palace, a rejection of every rule of taste and decorum, left behind by a man who decided that if he couldn't be loved for his beauty, he would be legendary for his monstrosity. From the sun-baked gargoyles of Sicily, we sail across the Atlantic to a lonely island in the St. Lawrence River, where a massive stone heart was left to rot the moment the music stopped. In the middle of the St. Lawrence River, where the water forms a shimmering border between the United States and Canada, there is a cluster of land known as the Thousand Islands. On one of these emerald outcrops, Heart Island, sits a structure that looks like a displaced piece of the German Rhineland. This is Bolt Castle, a 6-story, 120-room masonry marvel that stands as a silent, heartbreaking testament to the fact that all the money in the world cannot negotiate with death. While other ruins are born of neglect or war, this castle was born of a single, devastating moment of silence. The story belongs to George Bolt, a man who rose from a humble kitchen boy to become the millionaire proprietor of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. He was the king of the Gilded Age, a man who understood luxury better than anyone on the planet. But George had a singular obsession: his wife, Louise. He wanted to build her a monument of love that would dwarf every other summer home in the world. In 1900, he hired a small army of over 300 stonemasons, carpenters, and artists to transform the island into a full-scale medieval fortress, complete with tunnels, a powerhouse, and a massive yacht house. He even had the island itself physically reshaped into the form of a heart. For 4 years, the island was a hive of frantic, expensive activity. Massive blocks of granite were hauled across the water. Italian marble was polished to a mirror shine, and French tapestries were woven to line the walls. It was to be the ultimate surprise for Louise, a gift to be presented on Valentine's Day. But in January of 1904, the music stopped. A telegram arrived on the island with a simple, brutal command: stop all work. Louise had died suddenly of heart failure. George Bolt never returned to the island. He couldn't bear to look at the stone personification of his grief. He left the castle exactly as it was that afternoon. The workmen literally dropped their tools where they stood. Hammers were left on workbenches, crates of expensive tiles remained unopened on the floor, and the skeletal frames of the upper rooms were left exposed to the brutal Thousand Islands winters. For 73 years, the castle was a hollow shell, a playground for the wind and the river birds. It became a ghost house on a massive scale, where the peeling wallpaper and the rotting wood told a story of a future that vanished in a single heartbeat. Walking through the corridors today, even with modern restoration efforts, you can still feel the heavy, stagnant air of an interrupted dream. The scale of the abandonment is what haunts you. This wasn't a slow decay. It was a sudden amputation. There is something deeply unsettling about seeing a ballroom designed for hundreds of guests that never saw a single dance, or a kitchen built to feed royalty that never felt the heat of a stove. The granite walls are thick and cold, acting as a tomb for an ambition that died before it could be realized. Bolt Castle is a reminder of the fragility of the human ego. We build these massive, permanent things to convince ourselves that we are in control. But a single telegram can turn a palace into a pile of expensive rubble. It stands as a jagged, beautiful scar on the river, a reminder that love can move mountains of stone, but it can't bring back the person those stones were meant for. It is the world's most expensive "I miss you," left to weather away in the middle of a cold, rushing river. From the tragic, unfinished halls of a millionaire's love, we travel to the misty cliffs of Colombia, where a hotel built for the elite became a gateway for those who wanted to leave this world behind forever. Perched precariously on the edge of a jagged cliff in Colombia, overlooking the thunderous white spray of the Tequendama Falls, sits a building that looks like it was designed by a ghost. This is the Hotel del Salto, a masterpiece of French architecture that seems to be losing its grip on the mountainside. In the 1920s, this was the ultimate playground for the wealthy elite of Bogotá. They would travel by train to this mist-covered precipice to sip brandy and watch the Bogotá River plummet 157 meters into the abyss. But today, the velvet curtains have rotted away, and the only thing checking into these rooms is the thick, suffocating fog. The decline of the Hotel del Salto is a slow-motion car crash of environmental disaster and dark folklore. As the city of Bogotá expanded, the river that fueled the waterfall's majesty became one of the most contaminated waterways on the planet. The once pristine air turned into a toxic stench, and the sound of the falling water became a funeral dirge for the surrounding ecosystem. By the early 1990s, the hotel was abandoned, left to be reclaimed by the damp moss and the encroaching jungle. But as the tourists checked out, a different kind of visitor arrived. The local indigenous people, the Muisca, believed that the falls were a sacred site where their ancestors jumped to escape slavery, transforming into eagles as they fell. Somewhere along the way, this legend of transformation twisted into a dark magnetism. The Hotel del Salto became the most notorious suicide destination in South America. The sheer vertical drop and the swirling, misty void below acted as a siren song for the brokenhearted and the hopeless. People would walk through the empty, echoing lobby, step out onto the stone balconies, and simply disappear into the spray. The atmosphere inside the building is heavy, almost liquid. Because of the constant moisture from the falls, the walls are perpetually weeping. The red brick facade is stained with black streaks of mold, and the floorboards groan under the weight of decades of accumulated dampness. It is a place of intense psychological pressure. Legend has it that the spirits of those who jumped still wander the corridors, unable to find their way out of the fog. Paranormal investigators and locals alike claim to hear disembodied screams that are often mistaken for the roar of the water. There is something deeply disturbing about the contrast between the hotel's elegant, high society bones and its current state of spectral decay. The grand windows, designed to frame one of the most beautiful views in the world, now frame a graveyard of white water and jagged rocks. It is a building that has seen the very best and the very worst of humanity, a place where the champagne bubbles of the roaring 20s were replaced by the cold, final silence of the abyss. In recent years, there have been efforts to transform the hotel into a museum of biodiversity. But the shadow of its past is difficult to erase. No matter how much white paint you put on the walls, you cannot wash away the reputation of a place that has seen so much death. The Hotel del Salto remains a haunting symbol of how quickly a paradise can turn into a purgatory. It is an architectural scar on the cliffside, a reminder that some places are not meant to be inhabited by the living, but are instead owned by the mist and the memories of those who fell. Leaving the damp, haunted cliffs of Colombia, we cross the Pacific to a man-made island off the coast of Japan. A concrete battleship that was once the most crowded place on Earth, now left to crumble into the sea. Rising out of the gray waters of the East China Sea, about 15 kilometers from Nagasaki, is a silhouette that looks like a ghost ship frozen in time. This is Hashima Island, though most people know it by its terrifyingly accurate nickname, Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island. From a distance, its high seawalls and jagged concrete skyline look like a massive naval vessel charging through the waves. But as you get closer, the illusion fades, and you realize you are looking at a rotting gray corpse of an industrial empire. This isn't just a ruin, it is a nightmare of urban density, a place where 5,000 people were crammed into a space no larger than a few football fields. The story of Hashima is a story of black gold. In the late 1800s, the Mitsubishi Corporation discovered a massive vein of coal deep beneath the seabed. To get to it, they didn't just build a mine, they built a vertical city. Because space was the most precious commodity on the planet, they built upward. They constructed the first large-scale reinforced concrete apartment buildings in Japan. Massive, brutalist hives where families lived in tiny, cramped cells. There were no trees, no grass, and no open spaces. Life here was a claustrophobic cycle of coal dust and salt air. Imagine the sheer mechanical intensity of this place. At its peak in the late 1950s, Hashima was the most densely populated spot on the entire planet. Every inch of the island was utilized. There were schools, a hospital, a cinema, and a swimming pool, all connected by a labyrinth of narrow, sunless alleys known as the Stairways to Hell. The noise must have been deafening, the constant roar of the mining machinery, the crashing of the sea against the walls, and the voices of thousands of people trapped on a rock in the middle of the ocean. It was a masterpiece of efficiency and a monument to human endurance, but it was also a prison of labor. But in the early 1970s, the world shifted. Petroleum replaced coal, and almost overnight, the reason for Hashima's existence vanished. In April of 1974, the last residents were evacuated. They were told to leave so quickly that they abandoned almost everything. They left their televisions, their furniture, their children's toys, and their half-eaten meals. The island was sealed, and for decades, it was left to the mercy of the typhoons and the salt. Today, walking through Hashima is like walking through an apocalyptic film set. The concrete is crumbling, revealing the rusted iron skeletons beneath. The sea has smashed through the lower floors, filling the apartments with sand and debris. You can still see the chalkboards in the schools, with lessons half written from 50 years ago, and rotting shoes still sitting by the doorways. There is a profound, heavy silence here that is almost physical. It is a place where you can feel the weight of the thousands of lives that were lived and lost in the darkness of the mines. Hashima is a terrifying reminder of how fragile our civilization truly is. It shows us that when the resources run dry, even the most solid concrete fortress can be reclaimed by nature in the blink of an eye. It stands as a skeletal, gray warning, a monument to industrial greed and the absolute transience of human endeavor. It is a city that died of a broken heart, left to sink slowly into the ocean like a lead weight. From the crumbling gray concrete of a Japanese coal mine, we head to the jagged peaks of the same country, where a fortress was carved into the very stone of a mountain, designed for a war that never truly ended. Deep in the rugged emerald shadows of the Japanese Alps, where the mist clings to the cedars like a funeral shroud, there is a structure that feels less like a building and more like a jagged extension of the Earth's own bones. This is the Uzana Castle site, a place where the distinction between geology and architecture completely dissolves. In the feudal era of Japan, a castle wasn't just a home or a seat of government. It was a physical manifestation of the concept of fudo, or immovability. While the famous palaces of the lowlands were built for show, Uzana was built for the grim reality of a slow, starving siege. The philosophy behind this fortress was one of absolute tactical cruelty. The architects didn't bother with the elegant white plaster or the sweeping bird-like curves of the roofs seen in places like Himeji. Instead, they took a razor-sharp ridge and carved it into a weapon. Every path leading to the summit was designed to be a vertical killing floor. The staircases are nothing more than uneven notches in the raw stone, intentionally misaligned to break the rhythm of an ascending army. To walk here is to feel the mountain itself trying to push you off its back. It is a masterpiece of psychological warfare, where the very terrain is meant to convince you that you are already dead. The most terrifying aspect of Uzana is its hanging architecture. Because the ridge was too narrow for traditional sprawling foundations, The rooms were cantilevered over the abyss, supported by massive timber beams wedged directly into the rock face. Imagine living in a room where the only thing between you and a 300-meter drop is a few inches of weathered wood and the terrifyingly precise math of a 16th-century carpenter. The wind here doesn't just blow, it screams through the gaps in the timber, a constant reminder that the mountain is merely tolerating your presence. The history of this place is written in the blood of the Sengoku period, a time of endless, fractured civil war. The men who held this fortress were not looking for comfort. They were looking for a place where a handful of warriors could hold off 1,000.
To the walls! Move!
The interior rooms are cramped, dark, and smelling of damp cedar
Ready
and old
yourselves.
smoke.
They come!
There are no grand vistas for the sake of beauty. Every window is an arrow slit, every doorway is a choke point, and every floorboard is designed to creak, acting as a primitive alarm system against the shadows. It is the architectural equivalent of a cornered animal with its teeth bared. Walking through the ruins today, you can still see the deep grooves in the stone where the defenders sharpened their blades for centuries. There is an energy here that is distinct from the other ruins we visited. It isn't the sadness of a lost love or the ego of a billionaire. It is the cold, vibrating resonance of survival. It is a place that demands you pay attention to where you step, or the mountain will claim you just as it claimed the empires of the past. Uzana stands as a silent witness to a time when architecture was a life-or-death calculation. It is a brutal, beautiful reminder that we are at our most creative when we are at our most desperate. It is a fortress of the mind, carved into a peak that refuses to forget the scent of iron and the sound of the war drums. From the frozen defensive heights of the Japanese mountains, we head to a place where the earth itself opened up to swallow a mistake, creating a portal of eternal fire that has been burning for over 50 years. In the middle of the vast, sun-scorched Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan, there is a hole in the earth that should not exist. This is the Darvaza gas crater, but the locals and the few travelers who brave the heat call it by a much more visceral name, the door to hell. This is not a building in the traditional sense. It is a masterpiece of accidental architecture, a structural collapse that turned a boring engineering project into a permanent glowing wound in the crust of the planet. While other sites on our list were built by obsessed men, this one was built by human arrogance and a single, catastrophic mistake. The story began in 1971, when a group of Soviet engineers arrived in this desolate landscape. They weren't looking for beauty, they were looking for oil. They set up a massive drilling rig, confident that their math was perfect and their machinery was invincible. But they hadn't accounted for the hollow treachery of the ground beneath their boots. In the middle of the drilling process, the rig hit a massive underground cavern filled with natural gas. The earth didn't just crack, it buckled and dissolved. The entire drilling platform, the equipment, and the camp were swallowed into a yawning abyss 60 meters wide and 20 meters deep. Terrified that the escaping methane gas would poison the nearby villages, the engineers made a decision that would haunt the desert for the next half-century. They decided to light a match. They figured that the gas would burn off in a few days and the hole would eventually go silent. They were wrong. 5 decades later, the fire is still screaming. The crater is a boiling cauldron of orange flames and shifting sands, a circular amphitheater of heat that can be seen from space. It is a man-made sun that never sets, casting a flickering, demonic light over the dunes for miles in every direction. Standing on the edge of the crater is an experience that defies logic. The heat is so intense that it physically pushes you back, singeing the hair on your arms if you stay too long.
We are reading stable
The
levels
sound isn't
at
a crackle,
0.4.
it is a low, rhythmic roar, like 1,000 jet engines idling in the dark. The wind around the rim is erratic, pulled in by the massive thermal updraft, creating a localized weather system of dust and fire. There are no railings, no safety warnings, and no gift shops. It is just you and a burning pit that represents one of the greatest backfires in the history of the Soviet Union. The visual impact is staggering. At night, the desert becomes a pitch-black ocean, and the crater is a glowing island of liquid fire. The walls of the pit are scorched to a deep, bruised purple, and the floor is a mosaic of thousands of small flames dancing over the rubble of the collapsed machinery. It feels like a cathedral of the underworld, a place where the laws of the surface world no longer apply. It is the ultimate failed structure, a basement that opened up to reveal the furnace of the earth itself. The door to hell is a terrifying monument to the fact that once we unlock certain doors, we don't always have the keys to lock them again. It is a constant burning reminder of our own fallibility, a scar that refuses to heal. It is architecture by catastrophe, a beautiful, lethal mistake that has turned a patch of empty sand into a permanent, roaring monument to the moment the earth fought back. We are leaving the heat of the desert behind for our final destination, a concrete pyramid in the heart of the world's most secretive nation, a skyscraper built to be the tallest hotel on Earth that instead became its most expensive shadow. In the center of Pyongyang, the capital of the most secluded nation on the planet, there is a mountain of glass and concrete that pierces the sky like a jagged tooth. This is the Ryugyong Hotel, a 330-meter-tall pyramid that was designed to be a shimmering symbol of North Korean supremacy. Instead, it has become the ultimate phantom skyscraper, a massive hollow shell that has loomed over the city for nearly 40 years without ever welcoming a single paying guest. It is the world's tallest unoccupied building, a 3,000-room monument to a future that never arrived. The construction of this gargantuan structure began in 1987, fueled by a bitter Cold War rivalry. After a South Korean firm built the world's tallest hotel in Singapore, the leadership in the North decided they needed to go higher, bigger, and more intimidating. They envisioned a sprawling complex of revolving restaurants, casinos, and luxury suites that would prove to the world that their system was the pinnacle of human achievement. For a few years, the project moved with frantic energy, but then the Soviet Union collapsed, the money dried up, and the nation fell into a devastating famine. In 1992, the cranes stopped moving. For the next 16 years, the Ryugyong sat as a naked, gray concrete skeleton. It was a terrifying sight, a massive, brutalist ghost that dominated the skyline, visible from every corner of the city, but officially ignored by the government. It was even scrubbed from state-approved maps and photographs, as if by not acknowledging its existence, they could make the failure disappear. It became a dark star, a black hole in the middle of a capital city, where the wind whistled through empty elevator shafts and the floors were inhabited only by dust and shadows. In the late 2000s, an Egyptian telecommunications company finally stepped in to wrap the building in a shimmering skin of mirror glass, giving it a futuristic, polished look from the outside. But this was merely an architectural mask. Behind the glass, the interior remains a cavernous, unfinished void. There are no pipes, no wiring, and no ventilation. It is a 330-meter-tall lie, a beautiful facade hiding a hollow heart. In recent years, they have covered the exterior in thousands of light-emitting diodes, turning the building into a giant television screen that plays propaganda films and nationalistic light shows at night. It is a surreal sight, a building that cannot provide heat or water to a single person, yet glows with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The atmosphere of the Ryugyong is one of profound synthetic loneliness. It represents the absolute extreme of architectural ego, a building so large that it became impossible to finish, yet too large to ever tear down. It sits there like a silent, glass-clad god, watching over a population that is often struggling for basic necessities. It is the ultimate Potemkin village of the 21st century, a structure designed to project power while hiding a deep, structural emptiness. This hotel is the perfect finale to our journey through the world's most irrational blueprints. It is a place where the map was more important than the territory, and where the image of success was more important than the reality of the foundation. It stands as a chilling reminder that we can build structures that reach the clouds, but if they are built on a foundation of vanity and lies, they will never be more than expensive shadows. The Ryugyong is not just a hotel. It is a three-sided mirror reflecting the heights and the depths of human ambition, a pyramid of glass that proves that some dreams are better left on the drawing board. This concludes our tour of the 10 most obsessed, defiant, and haunting structures on the planet. From the coral heart of Florida to the glass pyramid of Pyongyang, we have seen that architecture is never just about shelter. It is about the restless, sometimes broken spirits of the people who dare to build.